Hello, today I want to read to you another true story and thoughts of a woman that is beautiful, and I hope you think about this as well. I never forget the year Mary, the mother of Jesus, became a real person to me. Up until that time, she'd always been a character in a story. A beautiful story to be sure, but a story nonetheless. Even though I grew up in a church and believed the telling and the biblical account of Jesus' birth, I didn't have a personal connection with Mary or Joseph, the shepherds, or the wise men. They were simply names and people mentioned in a wonderful tale told every year at Christmas. Not even when I played the role of Mary in a church performance of the Nativity story did the actual woman come to life in my mind. I was 13 years old and I was terrified I'd forget my lines or screech off key notes in my solo. I certainly had more important things to concern myself with than pondering the life of a woman who'd lived nearly 2,000 years before me. After I married, I bought a crochet for our first Christmas. Was a cheap set made in China and wasn't very fancy. Baby Jesus' blonde hair bothered me so much one year I had to paint it brown. My mother's crochet, the one I remember from my childhood, was beautiful in a simple, elegant way. The pitched roof, the little music box, the tiny ceramic lamp. It had always fascinated me as a child, but most particularly the figuring of Mary. The artist who created her did an amazing job. Her face was sweet and serene as she gazed lovingly at baby Jesus nestled in his manger. Her blue outer robe and light-colored gown had just the right folds in them as she knelt beside her newborn son. But it was her lovely hair that held my gaze year after year. Long brown wavy locks flowed down her back to her waist. She wore no head covering, and I always got the impression that this was how Mary looked when she was at home with her family, relaxed and comfortable. I'm not ashamed to admit I coveted that beautiful hair. Oh, how I wished I had hair like Mary. I remember how surprised I was to learn that Jesus' mother was probably a teenager when she gave birth to him. Tradition in those days was for women to get married or betrothed, as Mary was to Joseph, in the early teen years. Knowing how immature and silly I was as a young teenager, I marvel that God found favor with Mary and gave her the amazing honor of bringing his son into the world. But Mary was still simply a character in a story to me. Ceramic figuring with lovely hair. It wasn't until Christmas of 1990 that she became a living, breathing woman in my mind and my heart. That Christmas, I was pregnant with my firstborn son. He was due in March, and though I wasn't exactly great with child, I felt a kinship with Mary unlike anything I've ever experienced before. I could picture her placing her hand on her protruding belly to feel Jesus' movement in the way I felt my son move. I could imagine her talking to him, sharing her fears and wonder at his miracle of his life. I knew the feel of a baby in the womb, the same way Mary had. That year, Mary moved from the pages of the Bible into my world. I rejoiced with her at Christmas over the birth of her son. I understand her panic and fear when she and Joseph found Jesus in the temple in Jerusalem when he was 12 years old. He'd been missing for 3 days, or so they thought. I can relate to the whirl of anxious thought that went through their worried minds. I grieve with Mary each Easter when I think of how she had to stand helpless as the Roman soldiers nailed her son to the cross and then watched him die a horrific death. The pain of her mother's heart is imprinted in my own. This Christmas, I take out the 5 crochets I've collected over the years. I'll arrange them just so, making sure my favorite, the one my husband bought me, is prominent in the living room. Even though the Chinese crochet with blonde painted brown hair, baby Jesus, has a place. I gaze at each one of them, twinkling lights in the Christmas tree and marveling at the simple beauty of the Christmas family. Marveling that Jesus willingly left heaven to come to earth as a tiny baby. Amazed that angels announced the great event to a group of lowly shepherds. But always, I lean in close to look at Mary's face. I study it, wondering what she was thinking, what she was feeling so many years ago. I see her peaceful smile, a warm to the love in her eyes as she gazes at her son. Mary was a woman, a wife, a mother, a daughter, a sister, a friend. She lived, she loved, she laughed. She cried, she mourned, and she died. She was definitely not just a character in a story.